Good afternoon, everyone. I will discuss Chapter 5, Deciding Learning Objectives for ESP courses and programs. I will discuss the first part, and later on, Rika Banlegas will discuss the rest. In this chapter, all the different aspects of deciding and sequencing learning objectives will be discussed. First, introduce some important features of language that characterize different types of spoken and written ESP text. Second, discuss some aspects of learning theory you might also want to target in the classroom. Third, explain some course design approaches that are commonly used to sequence learning objectives. And lastly, look at the subject knowledge problem that exists in many ESP classrooms and show how it might be overcome. But first, let us have this opening reflection. Imagine you had to teach an EAP course in scientific reading and writing. In one of the classes, you were scheduled to teach learners how to read and write a research article abstract using the following abstract, taken from applied chemistry. As an example, what language, for example, vocabulary, grammar, organizational patterns, and skills, for example, how to read for gist, how to write concisely, might you target in the class? Where where would you position the lesson in the course as a whole? For example, early in the course or at the end of the course? Are there any aspects of the text that you would struggle explaining to learners? So if I would teach an AAP course in scientific reading and writing, um, I'd like to focus on the organizational patterns and how to write an introductory or rationale at the end of the course as a skill and as the kanang position. Where would I put or position the lesson in the course? So I would put it in the at the end of the course. So most likely as a form of project. And then, are there any aspects of the text that you would struggle explaining to learners? Um, it would be in the how to elaborately explain na makasabot jud sila kay applied chemistry needs to have a thorough explanation. And I think using simple words will help and at the same time define terms that are new to them. So, yes, that's it. Next. Synthesis and surface modification of highly dispersed spherical gold nanoparticles of 50 to 200 nanometer. So let me read. Elucidating the impact of nanoparticle size and shape on biological systems is of fundamental importance to nanotoxicology and biomedicine. Currently, the ability to determine this is limited by the lack of a model nanoparticle system having a narrow size and shape distribution over the relevant size range, 2 to 200 nanometer. Hydroquinone can be used to produce 50 to 200 nanometer gold nanoparticles that are relatively monodispersed in size with nearly spherical shapes. So, the model abstract is a fairly typical abstract in applied chemistry. Ano siya? So it uses a situation problem response organization linked together with a logical connector currently, and it makes use of both active and passive voices. As you have um, noticed nga I use orange color for the active voice, and as for the passive voice, I chose green. And then it is written solely in the present tense, and it contains technical terms such as nanotoxicology and biomedicine, hydroquinone. So that's technical terms for the applied chemistry, scientific abbreviations, for example, nanometer, which is nm, and long noun phrases, which are relatively monodispersed and nearly spherical shapes. Let's proceed. If a learner hoped to read and write similar text quickly and accurately, they would need to know about the different types of vocabulary that scientists use, the grammar forms and organizational patterns that appear frequently in scientific texts, various reading and writing strategies, and a host of other language and learning posts. Clearly, as an ESP instructor, you may not be familiar with everything that an experienced and well-published chemist knows about the language of applied chemistry. Yet, your knowledge of ESP will allow you to assist learners in achieving important learning objectives that will ultimately allow them to meet their needs. Okay, this are the foundations for deciding learning objectives. In many general English or GE programs, learning objectives are expressed in terms of the traditional categories of grammar and vocabulary. And then ESP courses and programs, in contrast, are rarely built on grammar rules and vocabulary lists in this abstract way. Instead, the learning objectives of ESP are expressed in ways that are directly linked with the results of a needs analysis and are built on a number of important theoretical grounded principles. So, basically, the learning objectives in GE are focused on the lesson and course goals that are built on concepts such as mastering the past, present, and future tenses, using the main modal and auxiliary verbs correctly, constructing simple, complex, and compound sentence patterns, expressing ideas in the active and passive voice, and other grammar and vocabulary lessons. So learners in a GE classroom are often encouraged to explain and practice the rules of grammar and learn those long list of vocabulary items that appear in the reading and speaking passages of their textbooks. But of course, medyo gamay ra ni siya makatabang when we used to speak the target language if naa ka mismo sa situation na makikipag-converse na ka sa ubang tao. Kay when you speak, dili man ka mo analyze pag simple sentence ba imong giingon or like active or passive ba ni siya, magamit ba kag conjunctions, kay you directly tell others what you have in mind. While in ESP, mas ga-focus na siya sa mga elements sa language, skills nga imo gi-target, basically mga strategies that you would employ in the classroom to cater the needs of the learners or your students. From the exercise kanina, so what do you think or asa to ang under sa GE and sa ESP? Like kani. So as we can see again, ang GE kay ga-focus siya sa lesson and course goals. While the ESP mas ga-focus siya sa elements sa language skills nga may target inside the classroom. So this one is an example of an ESP. Under na siya sa ESP. Um, yes, under na siya sa ESP objectives, learning objectives. While here, this is an example of GE, which is more on ga-focus siya sa mga concepts like na ang connectors, like currently gagamit siya passive and active voices, na siya yung mga long noun phrases and so on. Okay, let's proceed. Register analysis. Registers are a characteristic set of language elements, including grammar forms and vocabulary items, that people will associate with a particular situation, purpose, or social context. Registers are often referred to as styles, so you might hear about formal, academic, and public styles contrasted with informal, casual, conversational, private, and neutral styles, among others. And register analysis provides ESP course designers and instructors with a solid foundation for targeting and teaching ESP focused grammar. So basically register is a variety of language used for a particular purpose or in a particular communicative situation. So in every situation you encounter, you use speech appropriate to the person to whom you are speaking and his or her context. So the language used when talking to your friends is not the same language you would use when talking to your parents or even to your teachers, right? So this difference in language formality is called register. So basically again, when you talk to different individuals and situation, you use different register. So register analysis focuses on the grammatical and lexical features and on the understanding how sentences were combined in this course to produce meaning. Like for example, like kato kong gibasa ganya nga kanang about applied chemistry, 'di ba? Medyo dili man ta kayo ka-relate, di ta kayo kasabot. So because we're not familiar with the lexicons they used and how the author of that text arranged the structures of English, like giunsa pagpahimutang sa author ang grammar. Even though people from different fields don't understand the meaning behind the text, but it is comprehensible to the people naga-major sa applied chemistry. Now, register analysis made the ESP course more relevant to the learner's needs. It produced a syllabus which gave high priority to the language forms students meet in their studies and give low priority to forms they do not meet. So mas gi-focus diri ang mga lexicons na related sa ilang field para mag-concentrate lang sila sa information na they only or actually needed. In EAP setting, for example, it allows them to identify and teach language features that characterize the formal academic writing style. So this include complex or compound sentence structures, the conversion of um, phrasal verb forms into single verb forms, the use of long complex noun, verb, and prepositional phrases, the um, nominalization of verb forms, the frequent occurrence of logical connections, the using of hedging and stance expressions, and various other features that are discussed in the ESP literature. In an EOP setting, register analysis can highlight less common grammar forms that are uniquely characteristic of particular target language settings, such as hotel service encounters, airline flight controller directions, and nurse patient interactions. Register analysis also provides ESP course designers and instructors with an understanding of how vocabulary is distributed in and across texts. So we have three categories that includes a target vocabulary: the general, semi-technical, and lastly the technical. So in general, it includes a set of words useful to everyone who speaks a given language. For example, the words about food, weather, and colors. Kan siya kanang like general siya kay sa food dagan mang kinds of food. Sa weather, napoy lain-laing weather. Sa colors, napoy lain-laing colors like blue, pink. So, more likely ga ga baga refer siya sa word nga general ihang meaning or ihang term. Semi-technical refers to the words which have one or more general English language meanings and which in technical context take on extended meanings. And technical is a specialized vocabulary of any field which evolves due to the need for experts in a field to communicate with clarity, precision, relevance, and brevity. For example, words like cost, demand, price, supply are common technical terms in economics. So those words are kalagmitan gamiton sa field nga economics. Register analysis has seen a renaissance in recent years under the banner of corpus analysis. The corpus analysis is useful for testing intuitions about text and triangulating results from other methods. For example, speeches, magazine articles, and texting messages with a goal to discern certain rules of language use, grammatical or lexical patterns. And then register analysis is a necessary first step in an analysis of linguistic needs of students in ESP courses. So in register analysis can guide teachers in the selection and preparation of materials that should by their content, validity, motivate students to learn. It also helps ensure appropriateness of content. So let's move on to the rhetorical discourse analysis. So register analysis had focused on sentence grammar, but in rhetorical or discourse analysis, the attention and focus is to understanding how sentences were combined in discourse to produce meaning. Now, in an EAP classroom, for example, instructors can use insights from rhetorical analysis of academic texts to focus on and explain why certain logical connectors appear more commonly than others. Similarly, EOP instructors can use rhetorical analysis to focus on and explain why an increased use of modal verbs appear in the language of telephone operators that need to respond to customer inquiries in a polite and respectful way. So, rhetorical analysis focuses on interaction, looking beyond the literal meaning of language. It lends itself to studying the complexities of day to day family practice, helping to unpick taken for granted and often referred to the ideas and practices. So the purpose is to kanang investigate the functions of language. For example, like kanang what language is used for and how meaning is constructed in different contexts, which to recap include the social, cultural, political, and historical backgrounds of the discourse. So in rhetorical or discourse analysis, it used to study language and social context, and it focuses on the purposes and effects of written and spoken communication. So what is important is that learners not only understand why the target language is used as it is, but that they begin to develop their own rhetorical awareness that they can apply later in the understanding and creation of as yet unseen spoken and written text. Then the content of an ESP syllabus should be based on an approach that combines register analysis with discourse analysis. Why? It is because register analysis can be used to determine authenticity of language in relation to lexical and grammatical features, while discourse analysis can be used to help determine the authenticity of the message as an act of communication involving the sender, receiver, the situational context in which the message is embedded. So these procedures help better isolate what should be taught inside the classroom. Genre analysis. So let's proceed to general analysis. In his seminal work on the subject, John Swales, 1990, page 58, in his book, he describes a genre in the following way. A genre comprises a class of communicative events, the members of which share some set of communicative purposes. These purposes are recognized by the expert members of the parent discourse community and thereby constitute a rationale for the genre. This rationale shapes the schematic structure of the discourse and influence and constrains the choice of content and style. So basically, the way of examining a type or style of writing in order to better understand the conventions. For example, the conventions refer to the spelling, punctuation, capitalization, and grammar. So expectations, purpose, and target audience for that genre. So that is genre analysis. Genre analysis is an extremely powerful and I mean powerful analytical approach in ESP that allows course designers and instructors to identify the communicative purpose, structure, style, content, and intended audience of target text. It is important to remember that the scope of genre analysis goes beyond just the analysis of static written and spoken text. So, using this knowledge, they can then formulate course and program objectives that will ensure that learners will be able to recognize genre features and use them in their own language output, helping the learners conform to the practices of their discourse community. Ang discourse community refers to the people who have a shared goals, purpose, and understanding of the way in which language works. Then learners in workplace context can immediately put knowledge of genre to use in the creation of successful business letters, reports, speeches, and other language outputs that they need to produce in their jobs. So learners in academic context, on the other hand, can use a genre analysis of written and spoken text to improve their reading and writing of research articles and grant proposals as well as their understanding and delivery of academic presentations. They can also use knowledge of genre to understand and eventually produce the language outputs of their target discourse community. So even though they may not yet be fully fledged members or too young pa sila. So some ESP researchers are interested in how the text of a genre evolve over time and become blended with those of other genres. So another group of genre analysts, often called the rhetorical genre studies group, focus their work on the context and community in which text exists. So it provides us with more detailed insights on why genres are created and how they facilitate communication. So now let's proceed to the learning and metacognitive skills. Beyond language itself, many ESP practices have been influenced by research on learning theory and metacognitive skills development. For example, planning, selecting appropriate learning strategies, self correcting. Learning is an effective process where the learner's feelings will have a dramatic impact on the success or failure of learning. So research on learning theory dates back to the early behaviorist models of Pavlov, Thorndike, Watson, and Skinner, the rule-governed mentalist models of Chomsky, the cognitivist models of Ausubel, and others that focus on thinking, problem solving, and concept forming, and more recent constructivist models of learning, which emphasize meaning creation over meaning acquisition. So let's review on the learning theory nilang Pavlov and company. So we have discussed this sa EDU 100 Ma'am ni Ma'am Kwan ni Ma'am ni Ma'am Gwendolyn. So for Pavlov, he started from the idea that there are some things that a dog does not need to learn. For example, dogs don't learn to salivate salivate whenever they see food. So food is an unconditioned stimulus and salivation is an unconditioned response. As for Thorndike, he hypothesized that behaviors were strengthened by experiences of failure and success. So he tested this by repeatedly placing cats in a box, which allowed one way out when the cat performed certain behavior. So his results showed that the cats eventually stumbled onto the correct behavior and were released. As for Watson, he proposed that the process of classical conditioning, which is based on Pavlov's observations, was able to explain all aspects of human psychology. That is focused not on the internal emotional and psychological conditions of people, but rather on their external and outward behaviors. So he believed that a person's physical responses provided that the only insight into internal actions. For example, if makitatag halas, our immediate reaction would be mupalayo as a sign of being scared. Ni Skinner, he believed that learning is a process of conditioning in an environment of stimulus, reward, and punishment. For him, it wasn't it wasn't what comes before a behavior that influences it, but rather what comes directly after it. Ni Chomsky, um, the mentalist learning theory emphasizes the role of the mind in language acquisition by arguing that humans, are born with an innate and biological capacity to learn languages. Then, lastly, ni Ausubel. So, for him, he concerned with how individuals learn large amounts of meaningful material from verbal or textual presentations in a school setting. So, he believed that learning of new knowledge relies on what is already known. That is, construction of knowledge begins with our observations and recognition of events and objects through concepts we already have. So, yes, that is the review sa mga um scientists nilang Pavlov and company. So, I agree that learning is an effective process where the learner's feelings will have a dramatic impact on the success or failure of learning. Okay, when you're motivated to study, so there is a high rate or high percentage of success to learn. Next, this is figure 5.1, a model of language learning. So, language learning includes the behavioral, cognitive, and affective domains. That is why we based our learning objectives sa tulo every time gumataglason pan. In order to create balance sa behavior, cognitive, and affective domains um, sa learners and makater ang learner needs nila sa tulo. Around it are the strategies or steps on how to deliver lessons sa students nga para mahigo jud ang needs sa specific domain. So most ESP instructors have an um eclectic view of language learning and aim to develop and apply different learning approaches depending on the needs of different stakeholders, the learning objectives of the course or program, the backgrounds and expectations of the learners, and the time constraints they are given. So, this is the model of language learning. So, in an EAP presentation course, for example, instructors might use a behaviorist approach to help learners improve their pronunciation and signal transition between slides using a few memorized phrases such as, "Here is the outline, and let me now give you the conclusion." Oh, behaviorist approach focuses on the idea that all behaviors are learned through interaction with the environment. So, with the help of like group works, the students or learners will be able to acquire the language they need, or acquire the learning needs that they have to learn inside the classroom. Next, but they are more likely to use a cognitive approach to help learners create the language in the presentation slides, explaining, for example, how bullet points are usually listed as a set of noun or verb phrases starting with the same part of speech. So, cognitive approach refers to the mental activity including thinking, remembering, learning, and using language. So, apply a cognitive approach to learning and teaching. We focus on the understanding of information and concepts. On the other hand, the instructors might focus on affective factors to help learners deliver a successful presentation, giving them motivation to stand up in front of others, helping to develop and project a positive attitude, and showing them ways to reduce their anxiety about making mistakes so they can perform at their highest level. The factors refers to the emotional factors which influence learning. So, here are the general principles of language learning. So, even though each ESP setting will necessitate the use of different learning principles, there are some general principles that apply in almost all settings. So, learning is a decision making process. Learners ultimately decide for themselves what, why, how, when, and where to learn. Learning is a building process. Learners apply what they already know about the world and their experience of learning their first language to the task at hand. Learning is an active process. Learners use biological and cognitive processes in the understanding, creation, and application of new knowledge. Learning is a monitoring process, which means learners perform better if they notice their strengths and weaknesses, recognize their progress and improvement, and seek help and advice when they are struggling. Learning is an emotional process. Learners perform better when they see the value of the learning, enjoy the learning, feel relaxed, and have a positive attitude toward the material, the instructor, and the class in general. Learning is often an incidental process, which means that learners learn much more than what is presented to them explicitly if they are given opportunities to reflect on and use that material in their own unique ways. So the following are the learning theory in ESP addresses not only the behavior, cognition, and affective, but also the specific sub-skills that will facilitate reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So, Kanisha, you can read this sa PDF na gisend ni ma'am. Nara ni siya tanan dito. So, these are the sub-skills of reading, and then writing, listening, and speaking. So, in order to develop effective learning objectives for the classroom, ESP course designers and instructors can analyze the learner's target language context and identify specific skills and sub-skills that members of the discourse community use. At a more general level, An understanding of learning and metacognitive skills can also help an ESP instructor identify and help learners who might find it difficult to interact with others in the class or who are struggling with the class materials. So this can then be introduced and developed in class through direct instruction, in class activities, and learner-centered tasks. So that's it. And um, Rika Banlaygas will explain the rest of the chapter 5. So please listen to her and please listen to her um pre-recorded video. Thank you.